Just doing a quick test of the audio on the stream. If anyone has a gray Kia, we're asking you to move that. It's blocking the fire zone. Gray Kia out in the parking lot, blocking the fire zone. You do? Do you know who it was?
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. More people are coming in, so to whatever extent you can, like, maybe scooch to the center to make a little bit more room, or come.
Welcome, everyone. We are so glad to have you all here today. My name is Amelia Williams.
And I'm Zach Corbett, and we are here with our fellow Hartwick students, Sarah and Cooper, to introduce our guest speaker.
But before we introduce the Lieutenant Governor, we have a few things to tell you. Tonight's event is a part of an annual lecture series called the Leslie G. Rood Memorial Lecture, which was founded in 1998 in honor of Leslie G. Rood, who was a beloved Hartwick professor and administrator who had passion for public service.
Tonight's event is organized by the Hartwick Institute of Public Service, a nonpartisan organization co-led by Professors Chick, Elder, and McKinney, and is focused on engaging young people in our democracy, working with local government to make our region an even better place to live, work, and attend college, and importantly, inspiring a new generation of public servants.
The four of us on this stage have been working with the Institute of Public Service and wanted to highlight a few of our work. I personally have done a lot of different things, but I wanted to highlight something that I'm most proud of. Our work registering voters. For the past several years, we have hosted voter registration drives each fall, working individually with students to help them register to vote either here or where they're from. We try to meet students where they are. So Sarah and I have made some TikToks, but mostly Candy helps. We recently received word that since we have now registered more than 300 Harwick students here in Oneonta, Harwick College will now have its own polling place.
And as far as myself, I am running for mayor of my town, the village of Otsego. In fact, the election... In fact, the election is next week. I grew up in Otsego and I live there now, and I'm so grateful for all of the opportunities that I have received. When the current mayor announced he was retiring after a couple of decades in the role, I thought I would use my knowledge as a political science major and the experience I've had in student government to try and serve my community. In fact, Amelia and I had a chance to talk about young people and democracy, as well as my mayoral run on WMC Northeast Public Radio. Whether I win or lose, the experience of speaking with so many residents of Otsego about their concerns and hopes for our community has been absolutely remarkable.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Matsumbura.
And I am Cooper Cohen.
And like Amelia and Zach, we have also been involved in public service. When I started at Harwick College 2 years ago, I signed up to be an intern for the Institute of Public Service. I helped with local candidate forums, attended government meetings, and toured the DO's office. And spring semester of last year, I was appointed by the mayor of Oneonta and Common Council to be an official commissioner on the city's Community Relations and Human Rights Committee. Through all this, I've gotten to meet so many people who are working hard to strengthen our region, whether by serving in an elected position or law enforcement, or by attending meetings and voicing their opinions. Tonight, we would like to thank all the public servants and engaged citizens in the audience. You inspire us.
When I started at Harwick this fall, I started attending Common Council meetings, and even though some of these meetings ran over 2 hours long, budget discussions, I was really fascinated by them. I think they're a really interesting way to learn about Oneonta. And back in November, I was appointed by the mayor, Mr. Mark Drenick, to co-lead with my co-chair over there, Caden Studley, the new Town Gown Task Force. So after our talk tonight, we will have a reception out in the foyer, and we hope that you can stay. And during that reception, I kind of have a challenge for everybody here in this room. Harwick students, I challenge you to go find one community member and just go up and talk to them. And community members, I challenge you to go up and find one Harwick student and go up and talk with them. Because the only way that this city has a future is if we all work together.
And now time for the guest of honor, Antonio Delgado. He has had such a fantastic... Wait, 1 second. I'm getting there. He has had such a fantastic and diverse career. He played basketball growing up in Schenectady and at Colgate and was inducted into the Upstate Basketball Hall of Fame in 2018. He also spent many years working as a hip-hop artist, and he also was a Rhodes Scholar, went to Harvard Law, and practiced complex real estate law. In 2018, he won the election to Congress, representing the district we're in right now, until 2022, when he was appointed and then elected as lieutenant governor. Very relevant to our talk tonight, he was tasked by the governor to lead the first ever New York State Office of Service and Civic Engagement, where the goal has been to train and identify the next generation of local leaders and public servants who can help their communities grow and thrive. Please join me in welcoming New York's Lieutenant Governor, Antonio Delgado.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's give it up for Amelia, Zach, Sarah, and Cooper. It is so good to see our young people care about their community, about our state, about our country, and about service and leadership. I want to acknowledge President Mullen. We had a great conversation earlier this afternoon about leadership and the quality of teaching here on campus. To all the faculty and the individuals who commit their lives to empowering our young people, certainly want to acknowledge Laura Elder and Matthew Schick and Zachary McKinney and the entire Hartwick Institute of Public Service. To all of my colleagues in government, it is a real honor to be with the community here this evening. As noted, I served this community, served as a member of Congress, and no doubt a highlight for me, a meaningful part of my journey in life was the ability to serve as your member of Congress. I want to talk about public service this evening, and I want to speak to you about how public service really stems from a commitment to leadership. To understand public service is to appreciate that service is fundamentally about leading with love. The great Dr. King once said, "Everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love." Dr. King understood that while hate may very well amass power, through fear and division, hate can never be great. To be great, one must be good, and to be good, one must love. For only love can lead to kindness, compassion, decency, honesty, mutual respect, and understanding. Leadership is not about the power to control, but rather about the power of love. And love is an act that develops one's spiritual growth, not individual, personal, or material growth. As the author and educator Bell Hooks put it in her book, All About Love, love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. To this point, we would be wise to question those who call themselves leaders while being driven by their ego, always seeking the spotlight. True leaders seek to go beyond themselves in the name of a greater good, inspired by a higher power. True leaders are comfortable stepping into the shadows and willing to do the hard, unseen work that uplifts others. So, if you want to lead, you must be willing to serve, not to take, not to control, not to dictate, but to serve. And it is through service that you will find your true self, beyond the ego. As Gandhi once said, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. When you lose yourself in the service of others, you don't always do what is convenient or popular. You do what is right, even if it is difficult. When you lose yourself in the service of others, you don't follow the herd, you follow your heart. Not to be a contrarian or to just grab a headline, but to instead unite, to elevate the conversation and do so in pursuit of a greater good, a higher purpose beyond yourself. This is what it means to truly serve the public, to serve an end greater than your individual self. To serve in this fashion requires a moral compass. How badly do we need moral leaders for these immoral times? Times consumed by hate, violence, distrust, and division. You know, if Dr. King was alive today, he might refer to these times as, quote, midnight within the moral order. In his sermon, A Knock at Midnight, Dr. King tells us that midnight within the moral order is when moral principles lose their distinctiveness, when right and wrong are a matter of what the majority is doing and relative to likes and dislikes. According to Dr. King, midnight in the moral order is when people desperately seek to obey the 11th commandment. Shalt not get caught. Under the ethic of midnight, he says, the cardinal sin is to be caught, and the cardinal virtue is to get by. It is all right to lie, but one must lie with real finesse. It is all right to steal if one is so dignified that if caught, the charge becomes embezzlement, not robbery. He continues, it is permissible to hate if one so dresses their hate in the garments of love that their hate appears to be love. Midnight within the moral order is that time when survival of the fittest is substituted by survival of the slickest. His words, decades ago. As the midnight of the moral order sweeps across our country and the world, the need to build in ourselves and in our communities the capacity to love each other, to serve each other, grows even more glaring. As Lieutenant Governor, I'm incredibly proud to have stood up, as noted, the first ever Office of Service and Civic Engagement. Through this office and in partnership with the first ever Chief Service Officer, we recognize that through paid service opportunities, we can strengthen our collective bond and enlarge our capacity to see the humanity in each other through service to each other. To abide by what Dr. King once called in his sermon on being a good neighbor, unenforceable obligations. Dr. King says that unenforceable obligations are, quote, beyond the reach of the laws of society. Beyond the reach. They concern inner attitudes, genuine person-to-person relations, and expressions of compassion that law books cannot regulate and jails cannot rectify. Such obligations, Dr. King said, quote, are met by one's commitment to an inner law, written on the heart. He says, man-made laws assure justice, but a higher power produces love. This is incredibly important work. And it is not easy, but it is necessary. The climate that we are in right now is toxic. Folks are living on the edge, trapped in echo chambers of misinformation and manipulation. There's a nastiness and a vitriolic hostility permeating throughout our public discourse. Lying and blatantly being dishonest no longer seem to carry the same moral consequence as they once did. There's a growing pessimism and cynicism that is making us less compassionate and less understanding of one another. We are growing more rigid and hardened in our respective points of view. Essential democratic norms like mutual tolerance and self-restraint have withered away, only to be replaced by bursts of outrage and deadly violence. On top of that, we're still wrestling through the loneliness epidemic. And as a society, we have grown too isolated from each other. And this loneliness is killing us. It's a sickness in us. And it hurts our hearts, it hurts us physically, it hurts us spiritually, and it makes us retreat and do things badly. We know that in the absence of connection and community, an environment of incivility and hate take root. And recommitting to service allows us to reconnect and experience our shared humanity. And this is essential to protecting democracy. Democracy. You know, we should never forget that democracy is a moral endeavor. It's built on a moral idea. We have to believe in it. It doesn't sustain itself. We, the people, have to fundamentally believe in democracy. At the heart of it is the recognition that there is equal dignity in every single one of us by virtue of our shared humanity, irrespective of race, gender, religion, sexual orientation. It is our shared humanity, gifted to us by a higher power. And this moral idea of we're all created equal is expressed in a very simple concept. One person, one vote. Every single person has the power to equally right the wrongs of our society and to chart out the future of our society. A moral endeavor. So, what happens to a moral endeavor in the absence of moral leadership? How does a democracy sustain itself in the absence of moral leadership? I'm not talking about political leadership. I'm talking about what is foundational for any political system that we deem to call democracy to emerge, to sustain itself. Moral leadership. It requires love. It requires listening to each other before rushing to judgment. It requires being committed to finding common ground relentlessly. It requires creating spaces for difficult conversations and hard truths, spaces where it is safe to be mistaken or even acknowledge fault, even ignorance, spaces where mercy and grace are in abundance, and where love is at the center of the work being done. I know the power of love. Many of you, I think, tapped into the power of love when you helped me become the first person of color to represent upstate New York in Congress. You know, it was love that enabled me to win in a district that was 90% white. The 8th most rural congressional seat in the entire country. 435 seats. Number 8 in the country. A third Democrat, a third Independent, a third Republican. I mean, 2/3 of folks in my district didn't even share my party affiliation. And yes, our current president won the district 2 years prior by 7 points. Oh, yes, and I did have a hip-hop album. And if some of you may recall, I had a hoodie on the cover of the album, and you couldn't turn the TV on without seeing that hoodie plastered all across every TV program. You couldn't look at your laptop. I know my kids and my wife couldn't without some ad popping up trying to make me out to be the boogeyman. Not like the community that I came from along with my wife. A lot of hate in those ads. A lot of racial tropes, stereotypes in those ads. A lot of animus. But we didn't succumb to that. We worked our way across this district. We met people where they were. We listened with an open heart and stressed the importance of service and stressed the importance of love beyond the difference and tapped into our shared humanity, tapped into that moral foundation that binds us all by virtue of our shared humanity. And it worked. It worked. And it didn't just work. It didn't just get me in the office. It built a connection. It built a sustainable connection so that I felt forever connected to the community, and the community felt a real connection to me. So everything I did whenever I left in D.C., I took the community with me. I represented the community because I became of the community. Love was that bind. And it's the reason why 2 years later, and this is particularly relevant here in Otsego, 2 years later, I'd run again, having had 10 of my bills signed into law by our sitting president, and I'd run again. And when I ran, we won, but here's what was interesting. We would win in places where our sitting president also won comfortably, including Otsego County. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he won Otsego County by 5 points. I won it by 12. Why do I share that? I share that because there's something there. There's something in there about the power of connection, the power of love, and how meeting people where they are, genuinely meeting people where they are, still has the ability, still has the capacity to cut through the noise. It still does. We do not have to give up on that. It still can happen that when you give everything you got, you still can figure out a way to win over hearts and minds. That is the power of love. So let me say, first and foremost, as we celebrate the power of love and lift up public service and understand what grounds public service, which is love, let me say thank you. I want to thank you for demonstrating the power of love and understanding that despite the challenges we face right now, and there are many, love is always present. It can never go anywhere. It's always the constant. And I'm reminded of, and if you can't tell by now, big fan of Dr. King. He talks about marching in Chicago and how during one time when he marched, he walked past an older white woman And she ran up to him in a fit of rage. And she yelled at him and said, I hate you, I hate you. And he paused for a second. And he looked at her and he said, you're too beautiful to be so nasty. Kind of smiled at her. He kept walking. And he says, you know, as he marched on, a little later on, he heard somebody running up behind him. And it was the same woman, except this time she had tears running down her face. And she was overwhelmed with emotion. And she stopped him and she said, I'm sorry, I don't know what got into me. And I've meditated on that story because I don't know exactly what got into her. I don't. But I am certain that it was love that got it out. Whatever it was. So in conclusion, Dr. King, the night before he was assassinated, he gave a speech, incredible speech, talks about the mountaintop. And he talks about how, if you remember, he says, you know, I've seen the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I've been there. Then he says to the crowd, I may not get there with you, but I've seen it. I've been there. And when I think about how do you make sense of that, how does it, you can tell folks, I've seen it, I've been there, I may not get there with you. How do you square those two things together? How can you see something and I've been there and you tell folks, I won't get there with you? And then it occurred to me, he already saw it when he interacted with that woman. And every other interaction that he had, where he literally believed so hard in the power of love that he was able to witness people's transformation in real time from the inside out. And so the promised land, he realized, was already inside of us. Didn't have to look up to the heavens to find it. You just have to look inside and believe as hard as you possibly can in the power of love. And that's what made him a prophet, that belief. And I hope that as we navigate these dark times, what he would call midnight in the moral order, that we squeeze on really tight to this power. Because if you hold on to it really tight, I'm telling you, it can do all things. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing, including hate, that can do anything with it. It is supreme. It's so supreme that it can be a lot to deal with. But if you get out of the way, remove your ego, and let it fully help you get through the process, you become it. And that's what service fundamentally gets you to. Service fundamentally helps you tap into this power and be the best version of who you are, who we all are. And so thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on service and on love. And thank you all for giving me the opportunity to serve all of you. God bless.
And we do have time. We're so thrilled that the Lieutenant Governor has agreed to take some questions. So my two co-directors of the Hartwick Institute of Public Service, who are on each side, are going to bring over the microphone. I just wanted to remind people that the Hartwick Institute of Public Service that sponsored this event tonight is nonpartisan, and also the focus is public service. So we sort of ask you to sort of keep your questions in those areas. I know there's a lot going on in the world, so with that, we'll take it away. So.
Okay, hi. Right here, sorry. My name is Catherine Coco. I'm a, oh wow. I'm a public health and poli-sci double major, and I'm a senior. I'm also a part of the Hartwick Institute of Public Service. Got it. I didn't know where that came from, but will do. Public health and political science double major, and I'm also a part of the Hartwick Institute of Public Service. I'm doing an internship with them right now as we speak. So I was wondering, in a dark time, like you're saying, where it's hard to stay inspired and stay motivated to keep doing public service work and just advocating for people in love, how do you stay motivated?
Well, I appreciate the question. How do I stay motivated? There was a young student, I don't know if she's still in here, but we had a brief interaction earlier. There you are, right up there. And she asked me, what do you like the most about your job? And I think the biggest thing is the connection with the people. People are fascinating. You just got to have some patience and be curious. Be genuinely curious in what makes people tick. Because if you dig deep enough, you're always going to find something. You could ask the right question, and they'll share something that you didn't even know was coming, but then you can go down a whole thread. And I think there's something amazing about that. The other piece, though, is, and this is what I really lean on, is history. I mean, if you understand from whence we've come and what it took for me, for you, for a lot of us in this room to be where we are, and the sacrifices that it took, what it was that propelled generations before us to put themselves in the line, physically, mentally, spiritually, for a better society that honestly was a lot worse than it is now for a lot of folks. A lot worse. And yet they got up every day. They put their armor on, whatever that armor was. I think it was love, love of self, love of family, love of country. And they made a way. And so as long as we have that long view of history and we maintain that perspective and figure out how to personalize it, make it your own story, your own legacy, that's always important, right? How do you make it your own? I think there's always an infinite well of inspiration because our history is remarkable as a country and as a world, to know that history and to understand from where we've come and to know what it took for us. Hate's never got us to progress. You can scour the pages of history. Hate does not create progress. Love creates progress. Love sustains us over the hate. And that's the history. Thank you. Good evening.
My name is Josie Becker. I am a history and anthropology major. My question for you is, going off of what you said about how you managed to win Otsego County by 12 points when you ran, what were your sort of strategies for bridging that sort of urban-rural gap that we have in our modern political climate?
Great question. It's a great question because it's a divide that I believe to sustain ourselves in the future, we have to figure out how to overcome. Like that is a very important divide. And I was fortunate because my first foray into politics, came through the prism of New York 19. I had no other reference point of what it meant to be a political actor or a public servant. A lot of my colleagues, I found out, came from places where the political demographics were really one-sided, right? And so having to wrestle with different, diverse points of views or diverse issues, never really was required. I feel very fortunate to have made my bones as a public servant in a rural community, particularly because I grew up outside of a rural community, right? And so I've now been able to see things both from a personal experience and how I came of age myself and my family, but also I've lived a professional experience where I've had to invest myself in rural community in a way that made it personal for me too. And one of the things that I realized, and this is an important point, a lot of how government functions right now, I would argue, is divorced from our foundational commitment to promote the general welfare. Okay? That is a foundational, it is literally in the preamble, promote the general welfare. You can also call it promote public goods, right? But promote the people, okay? And what has happened is, as more and more money has gotten into our government, into our system, and has become unlimited in terms of its impact, and as there's been a growing a reality of economic inequality, more and more wealth being concentrated in the hands of a few and in corporate power, right? As that dimension has occurred, government and political actors inside government have tended to, in the name of self-preservation and power, shifted their alliance to where they're capable of sustaining that power. And it's a lot easier, turns out, to take a lot of money from a handful of folks and a handful of corporations to sustain your power than it is to invest in the people and trust the people. Now, how does this connect to the rural and urban divide? Because what happens is the government begins to function like a private investor as opposed to a public trust. The government says, we're going to start making policies that are overly wedded to the interests of the private sector. We might call them public-private partnerships, but they're not really partnerships. This is just the public sector saying we're going to make a partnership with the private sector and dictate the outcomes based on profit as opposed to the people. That has an effect on urban centers, right, who are relying on these services in real ways and can't afford to have them just be driven by the bottom line and by profit, but actually by outcomes and by results. But here's where it gets interesting. The way it manifests in rural communities is, well, you know what? Like any investor, you want to park your money where you're going to get a return on the investment. Densely populated areas might get that investment. Not so densely populated areas, rural communities, might get passed over. And so critical investments that any person who's concerned about the public welfare would be interested in, let's call it the internet, for example, broadband, get passed over because there's no return on investment. Government becomes a private investor mentality as opposed to a public trust. And so what happens is you get these communities that are experiencing the same types of things. They're being treated like objects in the marketplace as opposed to people in different communities. And the government, rather than doing things like FDR did, which would say we're going to make sure everybody has these basic needs to promote the general welfare, by passing the Rural Electrification Act as a part of the New Deal, we've drifted so far away from that desire to want to lift the floor so that there's a collective floor that we all can say everybody should have. And it's become basically a race to the bottom. And our urban communities are suffering, our rural communities are suffering. And so the only way to really help connect those dots is to tell each of those communities, you're being exploited. You are being exploited. If you're a small family-owned farmer, you're being exploited by big ag. They're squeezing you. If you're a small business on a main street trying to start your business, you're being squeezed by big box companies. You know, if you are a teamster driving a truck and you can't take pee breaks, you're being squeezed by Amazon. If you are a factory worker in an urban center, right, you can go on and on and on. Big pharma, big tech. We've lost the thread here, and being able to center that economic pain from rural to urban is critical. We can talk a lot about a lot of issues. There's a lot of important issues, but keep in mind, I don't care what your race is, I don't care what your religion is, your sexual orientation, everybody is trying to make a living. Everybody. And everybody can feel economic exploitation. And we got to drive that home if we want to start connecting our rural community to our urban community, our upstate community to our downstate community. That is the kind of message that I believe will help people see themselves in each other, irrespective of their perceived differences. Sorry for that long answer, but that was a good. I've been thinking about that question a lot.
Hello there. I'm Bill. I teach psych.
Hi, Bill.
One of the things that struck me when you were representing our community, I remember seeing a thing about milk and seeing a thing about the health effects of whole milk and flavored milk. And I was like, ugh, come on. But then I realized you're representing this community, and this community has a lot of dairy farmers in it. And I wonder if you can speak to the necessity in our society of when we have representatives, our representatives representing the community, not necessarily their own beliefs or interests.
Wow, another good question. And this is why the distinction between morality and politics or party is important to make. Because as a representative, I would think more than anything, and as constituents, you want to feel more than anything aligned on your moral outlook, right? That requires being honest, that requires being transparent, that requires having integrity and, and if you disagree, acknowledging disagreement, right? But it also requires, on the political side, if you have that, right? If you have that moral foundation and it's strong and it's solidified, you also give yourself a lot more room to then say, okay, how do I stay governed by these moral values and these principles, and how I go about doing what I want to do on behalf of my constituents, but also do so in a way that is most intimately connected to the needs of the district. And I could have things that I personally would want to prioritize based on my own lived experiences. But I am more than my personal, I have an obligation to get outside of my personal priority list. I have to genuinely commit myself in the interest of my constituents to meet them where they are, and not just meet them where they are, but elevate their needs. And elevate their needs in a fashion that, yes, doesn't require sacrificing one's moral values or principles, but ultimately makes you have to figure out, okay, how can I advocate for this community in a way that best reflects our connection and why they want to support me in the first place. I can't betray that trust. I have an obligation. You know, when I first ran and I got in, I remember because of the historical magnitude of it, there were a lot of opportunities to go on national platforms and do these interviews. And I remember telling my team, I said, no, I do not want to go on any national platforms. I want to stay as local as I possibly can, because I just went through a very, very challenging election where a lot of people tried to make it seem like I wasn't of the community, or I didn't really care about the community, or I was just passing through the community. And it was important to make sure that the community understand I'm with them, and I'm not here to chase, you know, the national. I want to stay with the community. Being on the Ag Committee, I didn't run for Congress to be on the Agriculture Committee. Okay, I'm just being honest. I didn't run. I ran, though, to serve New York 19. Right? Agriculture was not a priority for me per se, but it became one the moment I realized I wanted to represent this district for all types of different reasons. And I wanted to put this district best foot forward. And I knew that I would entrust, or I would gain the trust of a lot of my constituents. And the last point on this I'll make is, I'll never forget, and it was so rewarding. I was in Delaware County, the Delaware Fair, after the first year I was in Congress. And the first bill I had signed into law by President Trump was a bill for our farmers. It was a Family Farmer Relief Act, and it allowed our farmers to reorganize and sustain themselves financially. It lifted up the cap a bit more so more farmers could be eligible, a real life changer, a game changer for a lot of our farmers. Simple bill, but highly impactful. And I remember at this fair, a gentleman kept looking at me from afar, just kept looking at me, almost like sizing me up. And, you know, I didn't have detail when I was in Congress. I guess a lieutenant governor, now I get detail. But in Congress, I didn't have detail. So I'm trying to figure out why this guy's looking at me like this. And finally, he starts walking over to me. I'm walking over to him. He says, are you the congressman? I said, yeah. He said, listen, I don't like politicians. He said, I really wouldn't take the time to talk to many politicians. He said, but I remember when you were running, how you kept saying you were going to be on the Ag Committee. You kept talking about that. And I just didn't think it was, I just didn't believe you. I didn't believe you. He said, I got to admit, I got to acknowledge that not only are you in the Ag Committee, you're actually fighting for us and you're getting things done. And that was such a rewarding moment for me because it reaffirmed that when you are trying to earn the trust of the community, you have to figure out how to prioritize what you believe the community wants and what the community needs, not just what you think the community wants and the community needs. You know, they're not there to be talked down to. They're there to be uplifted and empowered by your presence, by your voice. You are a representative of the community. And that's why sometimes party politics can get poisonous, because it can distract you from what the community wants, what the community needs. They gave you the power. So now listen, there's going to be divisions, of course, but you got to make those calls when it's appropriate. But how you orient yourself and how you define yourself through that experience needs to be consistently grounded in the needs of the community.
It'll be easy. Chris Sedlaka from Gilbertsville, 25 minutes away. Before I ask the question, I just want to say how refreshing and uplifting it is to hear coherent, thoughtful discourse and explanation. Whoa. Your column is good. Your column is good too, Mr. Mayor.
Miss you.
And my question is, you and Josh Riley on the basketball court, one-on-one, first to 11, make it, take it. Who do I put my money on?
Not a contest. That's not a contest. I'm Division I at Colgate, man. Come on, it's not.
All right, we might have time for one.
student right here.
There's a couple, right. I don't know. Who are we picking? Zach's got one in his.
Over this way.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Charles Sherrard. I'm a teacher in Otsego County.
Good evening.
And I work with these students day after day, and we do what we can, and I promise you, we're putting in 120% of our effort, but there's so much that we can't solve in terms of poverty, in terms of nutrition, in terms of oftentimes the very safety of the kids that we serve. So I guess my question for you is, how can we as educators work with our public servants, such as you, to better improve the lives of our students, and how can our public servants work with us to improve the lives of our students?
I appreciate that question because I was talking to the president earlier about this. And the perception of higher learning and higher education right now across the country. And unfortunately, I think it's to some degree, there's a perception around it, particularly if you come from one side of the aisle where it's like, oh, well, it's sort of elitist, sort of removed from reality, and everybody's looking down. But the truth of the matter is, education and higher learning, it's foundational. It's foundational to self-discovery. It's foundational to self-determination. It's foundational to understanding your place in society, in the world. It gives you the capacity to understand what it means to engage with society. I grew so much, speaking of Colgate, I grew so much over the course of my 4 years in college. I came in as a pre-med student, left as a philosophy and political science major, okay? So the power of education, the power of self-discovery, what that can mean is so important. And I think it's incumbent upon the public servants like myself to come into these spaces and to affirm the work that you do day in and day out, the commitment that you bring to bear, the safe spaces you provide for our students to learn and to educate and to trip up over themselves, as I certainly did, and figure out what you believe and wrestle with these hard questions and not know, what the right thing is, but to love the process of learning. And I do worry that we are in a culture right now where we don't allow for that to flourish anymore. We suffocate the life out of that process, and it results in a crisis of knowledge, a crisis of truth, a crisis of objectivity. And we live in a world where facts seem to not really matter as much and only feelings matter. And that's a dangerous way to move, but we got to create the space for us to express ourselves, like I said in my remarks, and have mercy and grace. And there aren't many spaces outside of collegiate life where you can cultivate that level of freedom, that level of, risk-taking, to grow, not to be an agitator or an asshole, right? But to just grow and just figure stuff out. I believed a lot of things in college. I wrestled with a lot of ideas. I read a lot of books. And I think it's important for us as leaders to do that work. And I think it's important for you on your side to figure out how to really cultivate these kinds of conversations, be really thoughtful about, how you don't just bring in folks to speak who are flamethrowers or people who will grab a headline or make a soundbite for you, which, okay, but there are ways to go about this that are more thoughtful and, elevate voices that are more capable of pushing our students to wrestle with these things in a thoughtful and meaningful and serious fashion. I'll just say lastly on this, if we don't curate this with our young people and our students, then I'm very fearful that what is very serious work, particularly when it comes to governing, but also just being an informed citizen, right? It's just, you got to take it serious. You got to take responsibility for your own voice and who you are. If that collapses, then a lot of us just end up being pawns. A lot of us just end up kind of going through the motions. Somebody's winning. Somebody's winning. And I think, you know, the way democracy works is with an engaged, informed, vibrant, active, you know, society that wrestles with these conversations, wrestles with these issues, doesn't shut it down, doesn't cancel it, but enables it and empowers it, and then strives to figure out where there's common ground. That's the key. You got to wrestle with it to an end, right? Get somewhere with it that ultimately we can be okay with. It might not be everything, but that's okay. Piece by piece, we make progress. And that's a beautiful thing about this country. It's a beautiful thing about living in a diverse society. It raises the bar. You can't invite diversity and then get mad at it, right? You know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So,
thank you.
Oh, yeah.